Hey guys, this is our second ever Hasty History episode, and if you listened to our last one, you know that Hasty History is bonus episodes that we are calling no-nonsense, crash course, cram session history lessons. So none of our normal cocktail segment, no ads, no bloopers. We just get straight to the facts on these Hasty History episodes. Now, if you're a loyal listener of the podcast and you're looking at the title of this bonus episode and thinking, this sounds oddly familiar, you are correct. We actually already covered the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. We covered it in season 3. It was episode 24 that was released in February of 2020. So why are we covering it in a bonus episode? Americans all over the US are facing head-on the racial injustices that we have seen for centuries. And this incident here, the Tulsa Race Massacre, is one of the greatest stories of racial injustices in our history. And you guys, it wasn't that long ago. In fact, History.com has this quote that says that this particular event, the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, it remains one of the worst incidents of racial violence in U.S. history and one of the least known. News reports were largely squelched despite the fact that hundreds of people were killed and thousands left homeless. That's why I'm covering it again here in our bonus episode, because this incident is so relevant and it's so important and you guys have to know about it. So what was Tulsa, Oklahoma like in the 1920s? It was during the 1920s that the Ku Klux Klan saw its second resurgence. By the year of the Tulsa Race Massacre, or as it's also known, the Tulsa Riot, it was reported that there were approximately 3,200 members of the Klan in Tulsa alone. And so it was in this climate that the Tulsa Race Massacre occurred. In fact, in Tulsa alone, 26 black males were lynched between the years of 1907 and 1921. Tulsa itself was an extremely segregated city. Oklahoma became a state in 1907, and one of the very first things the state did was enact Jim Crow laws, which pushed African Americans out of voting, serving on juries, government offices, and it separated their travel and dining from that of white Americans. The city had approximately 10,000 black residents, which made up about 10% of the city's population, that all lived in a particular part of town. Tulsa passed an ordinance in 1916 that the U.S. Supreme Court found unconstitutional just the following year, that stated that if 3/4 of a street block was of one race, the other race was not allowed to live within that radius. Therefore, those 10,000 black residents tended to live together in a part of town that was called Greenwood, which is why some people also refer to this incident as the attack on Greenwood. Greenwood was made up of extremely intelligent, business-minded entrepreneurs. Greenwood was booming with black-owned businesses such as grocery stores, theaters, churches, dentistries, attorneys' offices, and more. I mean, it had its own hospitals, its own newspapers. This was a thriving city within a city. These blocks of black businesses in the Greenwood district became known as the Black Wall Street. The Tulsa Race Massacre all began on May 31st, 1921. The story is that around 4 p.m. on that day, a 19-year-old man by the name of Dick Rolland got on an elevator in the Drexel building to go up to the top floor bathroom, which was the bathroom restricted to black people. Rolland was a shoe shiner at the nearby shoe store, but the bathroom at the top of the Drexel building was the closest restroom to his place of employment. That tells you that although Rolland's family lived in the booming business block of Greenwood, he did not work in this district. If he had to go to a separate building to use a segregated bathroom, he was working in a primarily white district. This bathroom that he went to use had been arranged by his employer, so it's assumed that he used this bathroom regularly. While in the elevator, he made contact with 17-year-old Sarah Page, a white female elevator operator. Which, like I just said, it can be assumed that he used this particular bathroom regularly, which then leads to the assumption that perhaps he was familiar with Page, or at least that they had seen each other beforehand. Rolland entering the elevator and Page being the operator of that particular elevator on that particular day is the very last thing we know as fact. Everything hereon about this story is speculation. A clerk at a store on the first floor of the Drexel building claims he heard a woman scream and then saw a young black man run out of the building shortly thereafter. The clerk went to check on the woman he had heard scream and found Paige in a distraught state. The clerk then called the cops. It was pretty quickly assumed that Rolland had assaulted Paige, despite the fact that a statement from Paige has never been located, nor did Paige ever press charges against him. But Rolland, along with the rest of the black community of Tulsa, knew the climate in the city of racial tension and vigilante justice. In fact, as further evidence of this vigilante justice climate, just months before this incident, a white teenager that had been accused of murder was taken from his jail cell by an angry white mob and lynched. This is what the white vigilante movement did to a white man. So the Greenwood community knew that this whole thing meant trouble for Rolland. And they were right. Rumors spread quickly, circulating to the press that reported by that very afternoon that Rolland had raped Paige. The following morning, Rolland was arrested. He was initially taken to the city jail, but was quickly moved from there to a more secure location on the top floor of the courthouse after the police commissioner received an anonymous phone call threatening Rolland's life. White vigilantes shortly thereafter began surrounding the courthouse and demanding that Sheriff Willard McCullough hand Rolland over to them so that they could deal with him in their own way. The sheriff had men with rifles standing on the rooftop of the courthouse, had the elevators disabled, and had the remaining officers stationed around Rolland to protect him. By that evening, there was a group of about 25 black men that had come to assist in protecting Rolland, but they were turned away by the sheriff. There is some discrepancy here with this. Several of these men later testified that they showed up to protect Rolland at the request of the sheriff, only to have the sheriff turn them away when they got there. Sheriff McCullough denies ever requesting their assistance. A couple of hours later, 75 black men arrived at the courthouse, armed, again willing to offer their assistance to the sheriff, who, again, turned them down. Rumors about the black men appearing at the courthouse triggered the white men in the city to react. At around 10 p.m. that evening, approximately 1,500 white men, some of which were armed, arrived. Now, remember how I said just about everything here forward is speculation? Here's another piece of the story that we may never know the truth about. A shot rang out. How and why is unclear. It is said that a white man demanded that a black man surrender his pistol, and when he refused, a shot rang out. We don't know if the shot was on purpose, we don't know if it was on accident, or if this story that has circulated is even what actually happened. What we do know, though, is that a shot was fired, and all hell broke loose. Immediately thereafter, there was a battle of firearms that, although it lasted only seconds, was brutal. It resulted in the deaths of 10 white men and 2 black men. Following these first gunshots, the black community ran back toward the Greenwood district. The white mob followed them. And this is where the most devastating events of the whole incident occur. Mass violence was inflicted upon the Greenwood community. The white mob burned down homes and businesses, stole from stores, and even shot an unarmed man in a movie theater. Even more devastating, there is evidence that some of the weapons that white men had were supplied by city officials. By noon the following day, June 1st, 1921, approximately 1,256 houses had been burned and 215 others had been looted. Many of those businesses in the Greenwood district, which we discussed earlier, such as the newspaper and the churches and the hospital, had been completely destroyed. This was a loss of over $26 million in today's money. White people that were not part of the riot also became victims of the horrific massacre. Many whites that employed blacks as live-in maids or cooks that refused to turn their staff over to the angry white mob were attacked, and their homes were also destroyed. Many Greenwood residents were devastated when they didn't see the fire department coming to assist them, as their homes and businesses were being destroyed by flames. There's a lot of discrepancy here with the various accounts, but it is widely reported that firefighters did arrive to assist, but were met at gunpoint by the angry white mob, making it impossible for them to do their job. Many black residents began to believe in a grander conspiracy, that perhaps their fire department were in alliance with those that were destroying their very livelihood. Around noon on June 1st, the National Guard came in and declared martial law. But the damage had already been done. We will never know the exact number of casualties. Many Black people at this time did not have recorded birth certificates, and those that did had very vague certificates without identifying features. And when you don't have a recorded count of someone's life, it's nearly impossible to also record their death. The casualty numbers changed every day back then as newspapers attempted to account for the loss, but today we can now officially confirm, at a minimum, the deaths of 39 Black males and 13 white males. There were an additional 800 people hospitalized for injuries incurred by the Tulsa Race Massacre, but it's pretty safe to assume that many, if not all, of these 800 people were white, as the 2 Black hospitals in Greenwood had been destroyed during the riot and the remaining hospitals did not accept Black patients. An additional 6,000 Black residents were detained by law enforcement for their involvement in the riot. Some were held for as long as 8 days. Now, do you guys recall what started this whole incident? What the cause of all this chaos was? Rumors that 19-year-old Dick Rowland had somehow sexually assaulted 17-year-old Sarah Page in those brief moments that they were in the elevator at the Drexel building together. Within hours after the massacre concluded, law enforcement dropped all charges against Rowland. It was concluded that that scream that the clerk at the Drexel building had heard had indeed come from Page, but it was likely as simple as Rowland accidentally tripping or stepping on her foot. Rowland was held at the courthouse throughout the riots for protection, but then was released the following day. Rowland escaped Tulsa and, as far as we know, never returned. Now, I mentioned early on in this episode that not many people know about this incident. Now, that's not because people aren't paying attention or that they glazed over this incident in their history textbooks. No, it has only been in the last 2 to 3 decades that we have reopened research into this incident because, for years and years, this incident was deliberately removed from American history. The Tulsa Tribune, which had initially reported the riots when they very first began on May 31st, 1921, removed the cover story from their archives, as did local law enforcement agencies. No records existed about this incident. In 1971, a radio show host attempted to get a story out about the incident to commemorate the 50-year anniversary. So disturbed by the pictures that they saw of the incident, paper after paper turned down publication of the story. Only one paper, the Impact magazine, finally published the story, but this paper had a primarily Black audience, so white residents never even saw it. It was not until 2009, you guys, 2009, that Oklahoma history textbooks began including the Tulsa Race Massacre in their curriculum. In 1996, a commission was officially put together to investigate what had happened those horrible days in 1921. The commission was known as the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission, and they delivered their final report in 2001. The commission delivered their final findings in 2001, 80 years after this incident occurred. 80 years after it occurred, was it finally investigated and recognized for the devastating massacre that it was. This commission determined that the true number of casualties is likely more along the lines of 300 people killed and more than 8,000 left homeless as a result of the riots. The commission presented a number of suggestions, such as reparation payments to be made to the survivors of the 1921 incident, as well as to their descendants. They also provided recommendations that a development zone be funded in the historic Greenwood district and a memorial be erected in honor of those lost in the riots. The 1921 Tulsa Race Riot Reconciliation Act, which passed in 2001, provided approximately 300 college scholarships for descendants of the riot's victims, established the Economic Development Zone in Greenwood, and the memorial was created. No reparation payments were made.